Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start because we have a fantastic experience and adventure for you, and I'd like to give the maximum amount of time to John. So, firstly, I'd like to welcome you all to the Valentine's Day Amplify Festival. There's a chocolate on your chair in case no Valentine's called before. And so I have 1,000 Valentines today, and I hope I get something back. So today's session has a hashtag Passion at Work, and you'll find out all about that in a moment. But if you are tweeting, there is a mystery prize for the tweet that best summarizes the essence of what you've heard today. So feel free to tweet away. Just make sure that the ringer is turned off on your phone, and we'll announce that winning tweet later on at the conclusion. I also want to say a special welcome to the guests that we have from the Sydney business community. I see Craig Banning here. I see members of our board here, and we have had a tremendous interest in hearing John from the Sydney business community. So a special welcome. If you're sitting next to somebody you don't know, it's a good time to say hello and welcome. I also want to say welcome to our colleagues. Amplify today is being broadcast to, in 5 cities. So it's Sydney, Parramatta, Melbourne, Auckland and Wellington. So a very special welcome to our colleagues. Hi guys, we can see you, you can wave back. Nice to have you with us. I also want to thank Damien Tampling from Deloitte. Damien, where are you? Hi. Deloitte brought John to Australia this time, and we're sort of riding in the slipstream, so it's really great that 2 organizations with a passion for innovation can collaborate to bring John Hagel to you today. The origins of Amplify, some of you may not know that, but Amplify I founded in 2005 as a one-day experiment. And the purpose was really to cultivate more curiosity in the things happening at the edges of our industry and the edges of our business, where emerging technologies and trends are creating opportunities for us to grasp and internalize and transform our business. And in this quest to find others who were doing the same sort of thing, I came across the work of one John Hagel in an HBR article in March 2010 called The Distinction Between the Edge and the Fringe. And I have often been accused of being in the lunatic fringe, but I thought that being edgy was much better. And so I sought out this man, I pursued him, and I was successful in setting up a meeting with John in San Francisco in 2010, and later at the Aspen Ideas Festival, where I was able to persuade John that what we were doing with Amplify Festival was pretty much about bringing the edge into a large existing 160-year-old company. And he agreed to join us. And some of you may have been at his 2011 Amplify Festival talk, where he talked about the big shift and how business models need to transform, because the way in which we made money in the 20th century has been very, very radically shifted and shaped through the digital revolution and a whole bunch of other forces. So it is really lovely to be able to welcome John to Amplify Talks today to share with us some of his more recent observations around the implications of technological shift, what it means for individuals, what it means for organizations, what it means for leadership. Now, normally one thanks the speaker with a gift at the end, but I'm not one for following rules. So, John, I hope I'm not going to embarrass you, but I just wanted people to know a little bit about you. And I've chosen a few gifts, because what do you give a man that's kind of got it all? And so I found I found this tea towel. I know you're buying a new house. John is a chocoholic. If you follow him on Facebook or Twitter, he's always talking about where the best chocolates can be found. You may not think this, but he's also passionate about surfing. He lives just near the Mavericks. So I got this cushion cover to remember Sydney and Bondi by. I also know he's a man who likes deep thinking. So seeing that we're a city with one of the world's icons, I thought something to keep you busy in airport lounges. And also a book, The Architecture of Continuity, How We Design for Conversations. Knowing you, I think you'd like this. There's not a lot of pictures in it. There's a lot of stuff, good stuff in it.
Excellent.
And finally, one of our media partner for Amplify Festival is Boss Magazine. And I think it's one of our finest publications. So I've brought you a copy of today's Boss Magazine in the Fin Review. So at the end of John's talk, we'll have time for a few questions, but I need to ask you not to mob him at the end because we need to get John to a lunch function at 1 o'clock. There will be time for questions. Now, I'm going to ask John to take us to another place. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I unfortunately have to start with an apology. It's going to be a huge disappointment to many of you, but I have absolutely no PowerPoint slides to share with you today. And I completely understand if you want to go out and check email or do something else. Completely understand. The other apology is that I come from Silicon Valley, and there's kind of a standard script in Silicon Valley, which is you start by talking about all the amazing technologies that are coming at us and the incredible opportunities that are being created by those technologies. I'm going to deviate from that script. And I'm going to focus initially on what I call the dark side of all this technology. And what I mean by that in particular is as a result of the research we've been doing at the Center for the Edge, we've come up with a very strong point of view that one of the key economic impacts of all this technology, this digital technology infrastructure that's being deployed on a global scale, is that it systematically and significantly reduces barriers to entry and barriers to movement around the world. And so it intensifies competition at one level. There's mounting pressure, competitive pressure on all of us. It accelerates the process of change. So not only is pressure mounting, but the speed is picking up. And the third, if that wasn't enough, the third is that in addition, it creates increasing uncertainty and the potential for cascades of extreme events, what Taleb has called the black swans, that come at us out of nowhere and overwhelm our best laid plans. So those three coming together are a trifecta of pressure on all of us that create a very challenging environment. And it's not just at an institutional level, it's at an individual level. One of the things that, my favorite billboards is one that was up in Silicon Valley for many years, which asked a simple question. And the question was, how does it feel to know that there are at least 1 million people around the world who can do your job? Kind of focuses the mind. And again, very tangible evidence of this reduction in the barriers to entry and barriers to movement. We are increasingly competing on a global scale as individuals. And no matter what our credentials, no matter what our achievements, our accomplishments, it's what's ahead that counts. And so I think in that kind of environment, the question is, how do we take this mounting pressure and challenge and harness the opportunity as opposed to just being stressed by the challenge? And I think there are many things that need to be done. One broad theme of what we've worked on is the need to reframe innovation. What do we mean by innovation? What I find when I talk with executives around the world is that when the topic of innovation comes up, and it comes up a lot, it's one of the favorite topics now in business, the conversation very quickly narrows down to product innovation or technology innovation. How do we come up with the next great product and get it into the marketplace? And I don't want in any way to minimize that level of innovation. That's certainly increasingly important. But at least from our experience, there's a need to reframe innovation at a much broader level. And not just look at it at a product level or a process level or even a business model level, but at an institutional level. To go back to the most basic question of all, which is, why do we have institutions? Why do we come together in these large entities? There was an economist back in 1937 who wrote an essay answering that question. He won the Nobel Prize in economics for having answered it. His answer was basically the reason we come together in large institutions is because it's more efficient to coordinate activity within a single institution than it is across many different institutions. And at the time that he wrote that essay in 1937, remarkably perceptive. It was a very good description of the rise of the large institutions of the 20th century. It was a model of scalable efficiency. That's what drove the growth of institutions and enormous wealth creation around those institutions. I'd like to suggest that in this changing world, this big shift that we're going through, that rationale is becoming less and less compelling. One result of all this digital technology infrastructure is it's easier and lower cost to coordinate activity across large numbers of institutions than was ever possible before. And so if that's not the rationale, if scalable efficiency is less compelling as a rationale, what is a rationale that would continue to justify us coming together in large institutions? My belief is that the rationale that will increasingly drive the success of institutions is not scalable efficiency, it's scalable learning. That the reason we will come together in institutions is because we will learn faster as part of that institution than we ever could on our own. But it's a fundamentally different rationale, and it changes virtually everything that we do in our institutions today. You know, it's easy to say scalable efficiency, scalable learning. I believe these are actually in fundamental conflict with each other. If you think about scalable efficiency, the way that's been achieved historically is by having highly predictable operations, standardizing activities throughout the institution. Everybody does everything exactly the same way. Tightly specifying all the activities so there's no deviation, clear predictability about the results. And tightly integrating all the activities. Remove all those inefficient buffers that occur throughout institutions. Tightly integrate as much as possible. Think about that. Highly predictable, standardized, tightly specified, tightly integrated. Where's the potential for learning in that kind of environment? Learning requires taking risk. Failure. Failure is not an option in a scalable efficiency model. Everything has to be highly predictable. Where's the room to experiment, to tinker, to innovate if everything is standardized and tightly specified? There's no room. So I think it's an interesting transition, an interesting challenge, and I will say up front that I don't want to be interpreted as saying that efficiency no longer matters. Efficiency hugely matters. I just think that the traditional ways we've had of achieving efficiency are no longer working as well. And that, in fact, if we master scalable learning, we will become more efficient than ever before. But it's a different form of efficiency. It's an efficiency that is adapting rapidly to rapidly changing, highly uncertain environments. Very different model. So that's very high conceptual kind of map there. I want to drill down a bit. Some of the aspects of moving to a scalable learning model. One aspect is when you talk about learning to most executives, the reaction I get is, oh, we're talking about training programs. So what programs at what point in the career of the person, What should the curriculum be? To be provocative, I'll make the assertion that training programs in this rapidly changing world are becoming less and less relevant, and that the most powerful learning occurs day to day, on the job, in the work environment. Very different model. And the opportunity is to actually take design thinking and design methodologies, which we've applied with enormous success to our products, to the customer experience, and apply it to ourselves and say, what if we took as our design goal to accelerate learning and performance improvement in the work environment, and thought holistically about the work environment, not just the physical layout of offices and chairs and desks, but physical, virtual, the management systems, the whole experience in the work environment, redesigned it with the goal of accelerating learning and performance improvement. What would that look like? To our knowledge, and I welcome suggestions or examples, but to our knowledge, no company has even attempted that, asked that question, much less attempted to redesign work environments in that holistic way. There are lots of interesting kind of slices at the problem, but nobody holistically taking that on and saying, what would we do differently? There's a second piece if you take scalable learning. So one aspect is work environment redesign. The second aspect has to do with inspiration from a favorite quote of mine by a guy by the name of Bill Joy, one of the founders of Sun Microsystem. And he once made the observation, he said, no matter how many smart people you have in your organization, just remember one thing. There are a lot more smart people outside your organization than inside. And so if you're really serious about scalable learning, if all you're doing is focusing on the people within the four walls of your enterprise, you're never going to scale to the level of somebody who's actively trying to connect, identify and connect and collaborate with all the smart people outside your organization. What would that look like? What kinds of ecosystems would we create that would scale learning beyond our individual institution into a broader ecosystem? Another opportunity. But I'm really going to focus on a third element of scalable learning, because today is Valentine's Day, and focus on the importance of passion in terms of scalable learning. And what do I mean? Well, first of all, I get the reaction, I'm from California, and as soon as people realize that, they say, oh, he's one of those. Self-realization, self-actualization, human potential, he's one of those people. I don't want to diminish that, but I came to passion from a very different angle. And it was driven by the broader research agenda that we have around understanding this big shift and how do you respond to mounting performance pressure. And the one thing we started to look for, we said, okay, let's look for environments where you see sustained, extreme performance improvement. Sustained, extreme performance improvement. A whole variety of arenas, everything from extreme sports. To Annalie's comment earlier, one of my passions and interests is big wave surfing. So big wave surfing, extreme skiing, there are lots of examples of other kinds of extreme sports. But looking at how sustained extreme performance improvement occurs in those environments. Looking at online video gaming environments, war game environments, where sustained extreme performance improvement, if you don't master it, you die. Simple as that. One of the things we found is that across all these environments, despite the diversity of the arenas we were looking at, there was one common element in all those environments. And what was common was that every single participant was deeply passionate about what they were trying to do. Deep passion. Now the issue, when I talk about passion, one of many issues, is that we all nod our heads when the word passion is said, but we all have different kinds of meanings that we attach to that word. What is passion? Well, it turns out there are many different forms of passion, and one of the things we've done over time is develop a taxonomy. What are the different categories of passion? What do they look like? But what we focused on was the kind of passion that we saw in these environments. And we came up with the category of what we call the passion of the explorer, as one form of passion that was really represented in all these environments. And what we mean by that, passion of the explorer, is three attributes that come together that are very powerful. The first attribute is a long-term commitment to a specific domain. You talk to people in these environments, they are in it for the long term. If not their entire life, at least for the foreseeable future, for a very long period of time, they're committed to being in that domain and not just learning about the domain, but making a difference in that domain. And not just a one-time difference, but an increasing difference over time in that domain. Long-term commitment to that domain. So that's one element. There's a second element in the passion of the explorer, which is a questing disposition. What do we mean by that? Well, I go back to the traditional work environment, typical work environment. And what happens to a worker when they're confronted with an unexpected challenge? The general reaction, and I'm overgeneralizing, but the general reaction is to try to ignore the challenge. Hope that it goes away. Sometimes it does. If it doesn't go away, you try to paper it over, you try to hide it. If that doesn't work, you try to kludge your way through the challenge. But your key goal is to get back to your assigned task. What's your assigned job? And that challenge is just a nuisance. Get it out of my way. Well, a person with a questing disposition has a very different reaction to that unexpected challenge. The person with a questing disposition, their reaction is, wow, that's really interesting. I never saw that before. What would I do? How would I tackle that? This is an opportunity to get to a new level of performance. This is exciting. Fundamentally different reaction. It's that questing disposition. And by the way, these people with the passion of the explorer, they don't just wait for these challenges to happen. They go out and seek them out. And if they can't find them, they get bored. And they'll end up leaving and find an environment where they do get those challenges. So that's the second element. And then there's a third element that comes together to represent this passion of the explorer, which is what we call a connecting disposition. And what we mean by that is, what's your reaction when you're confronted with a challenge? Many of us will tend to go off in a corner somewhere and try to sort it through, figure it out, and come back and present the answer. The passion of the explorer, these people, their instinct is immediately to reach out. Find anybody who has relevant expertise or experience or just shares my passion around this challenge and work with them to find an answer quickly. Get to that next level as quickly as possible. So it's a connecting disposition. These three elements, that long-term commitment to a domain, this notion of a questing disposition, and the notion of a connecting disposition, come together in a very powerful way to accelerate learning and performance improvement. I would suggest in an environment of mounting performance pressure, where we're under more and more challenges, we really want passion of the explorer in our workforce. The problem is, and at this point I rely on US data, so I'm not sure how it would apply in Australia, but we went out in the US and tried to understand in the US workforce, how much passion is there? And we didn't ask, are you passionate about your work? Because you obviously get biased answers. But we pulled apart what are the behaviors that passionate explorers exhibit, and we asked about those behaviors, and then deduced what the level of passion is in the workforce. The problem, our finding was that a grand total of 11% of the workforce has this passion of the explorer. 89% have no passion. If you're in a world of mounting performance pressure, I would suggest that is a huge, huge problem. Now, in a paradoxical way, Actually, I believe that 11% is a sign of great success. Because I think most companies don't want passion in the workforce. Or, my favorite way of representing an executive's reaction, they'll say, yeah, we want passionate workers. We want workers who will work on their assigned task nights and weekends. That's a passionate worker. Different form of passion, maybe. Well, it's not the passion we're talking about. The passion of the explorer is a risk taker. They're constantly moving beyond the assigned task in unpredictable, unexpected ways. They're driven by this desire to learn, this passion to learn. It's very threatening to most traditional companies that value predictability. So I don't think this 11% is a sign of failure. I think it's a sign of huge success. We have relentlessly and systematically squeezed the passion out of the workforce. But I think at great cost in terms of our ability to thrive in this era of mounting pressure. So I think a big question and opportunity is how do we in fact nurture this kind of passion? And before I go beyond that, I just want to give two interesting dimensions of this passion of the explorer that I think are going to be increasingly valuable to us in the workforce. One element, I talked about connecting disposition, and often in business circles, you get this image of the professional networker, the person who goes out and exchanges business cards and connects and creates this incredible Rolodex of names and contacts. That's not what we mean by connecting disposition in this case. One of the things you find with passionate explorers is almost inevitably within 30 minutes of a conversation, this person is talking about this really hard problem that they're wrestling with, that they don't have an answer to. And is there any way you can help me come up with some ideas about how I might tackle this problem? One of the things that does is it expresses vulnerability. In contrast to the conventional wisdom of your personal brand, where you carefully think through all your accomplishments and your credentials, and you package that in the most compelling way and present it, and by the way, if you have any weaknesses, keep them hidden, because that's going to undermine your personal brand. Passionate explorer is out there expressing vulnerability. They spend no time crafting their presence and their presentation. They want to help. And what it does is it builds trust. It builds trust-based relationships that are extremely powerful in terms of connecting and learning with others. So it's a very different model. One of my favorite stories, just as a bit of a detour on this, is a friend of mine by the name of Chris Anderson, who for many years ran Wired Magazine, was the editor of Wired Magazine. He had a deep passion, quite unexpectedly, around unmanned drone aircraft technology. And he actually set up a company on the side to build this kind of technology. But he became more and more insecure as he built this company that he had no technology background. He was actually a musician by background before he went into publishing and editing. So he said, I got to find myself a chief technology officer who will help me run this company, who really knows the technology. And he went out and very systematically did a search of all the logical places, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Caltech, to look for PhDs in this technology. And he couldn't find anybody who had the right combination of technology expertise. But one day he was in an online discussion forum about drone technology, and he started talking about this really hard problem he was facing in terms of a particular design issue. And he struck up a conversation with this person in the forum, and the more they talked, the more excited Chris became. He said, wow, this person knows more about this technology than anybody I've ever encountered. Who is this person? And he finally ventured forth and asked him where he got his PhD. And there was kind of this embarrassed silence at the other end and shift in the conversation. But the conversation continued, and finally it came out that this person that Chris was talking to was a high school dropout from Tijuana, Mexico, who had just become so passionate about this technology, completely self-taught, learned it all on the side. Short story, he's now the chief technology officer of Chris's company. But that willingness to express vulnerability, if Chris had not gone out and said, I got this really hard problem, can anybody help me figure it out? He would have never found this person. Certainly not in the PhD circles that he was searching for. So I think it's a very interesting opportunity, again, that drives learning in terms of being able to express that kind of passion. The other piece is just, one of the things I find interesting in the passion of the explorer is a very complex blend between collaboration, I talked about this connecting disposition, but also a competitive element. There's a real desire to get to that next level of performance and do it first, get out there ahead of everybody else as much as possible. And I think it's a very rich kind of interaction between competition and collaboration that exists in these environments. It's neither one or the other. It's a combination of the two. And my favorite story in that regard, back to the big wave surfing and Mavericks, one of the big competitions. It's a fantastic competition if you're not aware of it. The organizers wait until the waves are just right. They don't have a specified date for the competition every year. It's on this date. It's when the waves are right. And then they go out and issue an announcement, and you have 48 hours to come to Mavericks to compete in this competition from all around the world, from Australia, South Africa, everywhere. And the best in the world come to compete. And in this particular competition, this was a couple of years ago, the 6 finalists, the ones who had survived all the rounds of competition to that point, were paddling out to do the final ride and determine who was going to be the winner. As they were paddling out, they started a conversation, and they basically decided, look, whoever wins, that's great, but we all are incredibly accomplished at what we're doing, and we all have such respect for each other. Let's just agree in advance that we're going to share the prize. Whoever gets the prize, we'll share it among the 6 of us. But it's a great indication of that competitive spirit at one level, but the mutual respect and collaboration that drives incredible learning in that kind of environment. So, spent a lot of time on passion. It's Valentine's Day, and hopefully resonates with all of you. I think one of the key questions is, how do we catalyze and nurture and draw out passion? Particularly, again, maybe in Australia it's different, but at least in the U.S., 11% have passion in the work they do. In that context, I think there are many, many potential approaches that have value in that regard, but I want to focus on one which I think has a lot of promise and potential but has not been effectively harnessed. And it has to do with the distinction that I draw between stories and narratives. And I know for most people, these terms are synonymous, they're interchangeable, stories and narrative and vice versa. I want to draw a distinction, which I think is an important one, and whether we call it a narrative or a widget, whatever, I think there's a different piece out there. For me, a story has 2 key elements to it. One element is it's self-contained. There's a beginning, a middle, and a resolution to a story. Something happens to resolve the situation. Self-contained entity. And the story is about me, the storyteller, or it's about those people over there. It's not about you. I mean, you can think about how you might have acted in that story, what kind of approach you would have taken in that story, but it's not about you. It's about those people or me. The distinction that I think is an interesting one is, for me, a narrative, number one, is not self-contained, it's open-ended. It is not yet resolved. It's to be determined. And the resolution of the narrative hinges on you. It hinges on the choices you make, the actions you take. What will it be? You have a role in shaping the outcome of this narrative. Very different kind of model. And I know in business there's an increasing focus on the power of storytelling, the emotional engagement that you get from storytelling, and absolutely that is certainly the case. But I highlight that in the context of this distinction, throughout history, millions of people have given their lives for narrative. You want to talk about emotional engagement? The ultimate sacrifice for a narrative. Every successful social movement throughout history has been driven by a powerful narrative. And I think you can talk about narrative at multiple levels. I think there's an individual narrative. We each have our own narrative. Most of us haven't articulated it, even to ourselves, much less to anybody else. But if you look at the choices and actions you've taken throughout your life, there are patterns that illustrate a narrative. What's your narrative about your role and the contribution you're here to make? What kind of impact are you trying to achieve? With whom? And what's the role of other people in that narrative? I think there's huge value in just reflecting and stepping back and saying, what is my narrative? Is it the kind of narrative that I really should have, or is there an opportunity to modify and evolve that narrative in ways to have even more impact? So there's an individual narrative. I think there are potential for institutional narratives. For an institution, what's the narrative of an institution? And I think there are broader social or regional narratives. Again, I come from Silicon Valley, and there is a very powerful narrative that has driven the growth of Silicon Valley. It's all around the exponential power of this new digital technology and its ability to change the world. But it depends on you. Are you coming? Are you going to join us in Silicon Valley? Are you going to change the world? It's up to you. So I want to, in the context of passion again, passion of the explorer, what's really intriguing to me about narrative, the way I've framed it, is number one, it is a long-term, open-ended opportunity that's defined by a narrative. If you want to cultivate a long-term commitment to a domain, it would be really powerful to have a narrative that engages the attention and the commitment of people to make that long-term commitment to the domain. Narratives are all about opportunity that has not yet been realized. And by the way, there are a lot of challenges along the way. This opportunity is not a given. We have to confront and overcome huge challenges along the way. You want to cultivate a questing disposition? That's pretty exciting. Now I'm excited by these challenges because there's this incredible opportunity down the road, and it hinges on me as to whether I'm going to take on those challenges. And you want connecting disposition? Narratives bring people together. It's a shared narrative. It's about us. Are we going to do this together? So it cultivates that connecting disposition. So if you want to draw out and amplify passion of the explorer, I think narratives are a very powerful way to do that. The challenge is, again, from my experience at the institutional level, there are very few examples of narratives for companies or institutions. My experience when I talk to executives about narratives is they say, oh, we have a narrative. You know, we started in this garage over here, and we faced huge challenges, and we accomplished great things, and there's much more to come. Stay tuned. We're going to do even greater things in the future. That's our narrative. Well, my response is, that's great. That's a story about you. It's open-ended, but it's still about you. It's not about anybody else. You can sit in awe at the great accomplishments of this company, but it's not a narrative about you. And so the question is, what would a narrative, in the way I'm describing it, look like for an institution? And I have at least a couple of examples, and again, I don't find a lot, so welcome, again, any other examples that you have. But one of the most powerful examples, I think, of an institutional narrative is what Apple had. And it was condensed around a very simple kind of slogan, which was think different. That was the slogan, 2 words. But you unpack it, and there is an extremely rich narrative behind that slogan. Broad brush strokes, the narrative is, for decades, we had a set of technologies that forced us into these uniform boxes. Your job was to fit into these boxes for the technology to work. Now, for the first time, we have a set of technologies that allow you the opportunity to express your unique individuality, to focus on what you are as a person and what's unique and individual about you. But it's not a given. That's not going to happen unless you think different. It's up to you. Are you going to think different? Then you can tap into this incredible potential. Very powerful narrative. And I think it's one of the reasons why, at least for a long period of time, there has been almost a religion around Apple. You know, those who bought into that narrative, wow, that really got them engaged and committed. And yes, you know, Apple had some technology that would help you think different, but it's about you. It's up to you. Are you going to think different? Another quick example, just even more briefly, but I think another slogan that you can unpack into a pretty powerful narrative is what Nike has around just do it. Just do it. You know, in a world of increasing distraction and pressures on time and inertia that keeps you focused on your comfort zone, you have an opportunity to break through and achieve levels of performance that have been unheard of in history. But it's not going to happen automatically. It's up to you. Are you just going to do it? Very interesting way of drawing out that participation and engagement, and drawing out passion. Incredible passion that can be unleashed from that kind of narrative. So I think there's huge opportunity for companies and institutions of all kinds to tap into narratives as a way to catalyze and amplify passion among individuals, both within the workforce and more broadly in terms of the markets and audiences you're trying to reach. But it's an untapped opportunity by and large. I think a huge one, and requires, again, the sense that passion really is important and needs to be developed. So I think the broad observation I would make, and I started with this notion of the dark side of technology and mounting performance pressure, I think there's an opportunity for all of us if we recognize, first of all, that is happening on a global scale and that it's a sustained process. This isn't something that's temporary or cyclical. It is a long-term process of mounting performance pressure. If we first of all recognize that's the world we're living in, and second of all become much more focused on what is required to be successful in that kind of world, because it's a very different world from the one we've lived in historically, I think it will drive us to focus much more on the importance and power of passion. It will focus us much more on the potential of narrative as a way to draw out that passion. And the good news, just to end on a positive note, is that I'm an optimist from Silicon Valley, so genetically that's my disposition, that if we understand all that and harness the power of these forces, small moves, smartly made, can set very big things in motion. We can do things with more limited resources than we ever thought possible. But it requires a very different mindset, very different set of practices, and ultimately a very different set of institutions than the ones we've built and created to date. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to conversation.
We have time for questions, so just put your hand up and we'll get a microphone to you. If you could just state your name, Jenny Maraska, I know.
That's easy. John, I would very much doubt whether we had 11% of passionate explorers. I rather think that the culture of most of our large organisations mitigates against that. And what I suspect happens in the States, and I'm interested in your opinion versus Australia, is that passionate explorers in Australia, I think, tend to set up their own business because they don't have really organisations to go to. And I'm interested in how you facilitate the knowledge of that change and whether it's about getting more of the research out there, or how do we start to change the cultures so we can spin that around?
No, it's a great question. I think that unfortunately we don't have enough of a time series to be able to document this and demonstrate it, but we have a hypothesis that there is, if you look in the U.S. workforce, higher levels of passion among the self-employed and the independent contractor category versus those who work for large companies. The larger the company, the lower the level of passion. And our hypothesis is that over time what you've seen is a flight of passion from large institutions. Those who do have the passion get frustrated and head off and do their own thing. So I think to the question of how do we address that, it's not an easy answer. Again, I believe we have a set of institutions that were very systematically and explicitly designed to eliminate passion. And by the way, it starts with the school system. It doesn't start with our corporations. Again, I'm a U.S. experience, but there's very compelling historical analysis that says very consciously the public school system in the U.S. was designed to take children and train them how to follow orders reliably and predictably, and prepare them for the workforce that they were going into. So I think the challenge starts at the school system, not just at the corporate level. But I think part of it, again, is just building awareness that the world has changed in a way that if we don't have that kind of passion, we are going to be increasingly disadvantaged. And so we need to start the process of reassessing and redesigning to accommodate that.
We'll just pass it on here and then I'll pass it. John, I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
It was very interesting and inspiring. I want to ask, you're at Deloitte. How do you commercialize this? What do you sell to clients? What's the service that is on offer to your clients?
First of all, I guess the primary goal is not to sell things for us. I mean, as a research center, our goal is just to help executives understand the world. All the research we do is freely and publicly available. It's not, we're not selling it to clients. Having said that, I do think there's a whole host of ways we can be helpful to clients. One of the things I mentioned early on, this whole notion of work environment redesign. It's a new service line that we're beginning to commercialize, which is around how would we redesign the work environment to accelerate learning and performance improvement in the workforce. So we do have services that we can engage with clients around, but our primary goal is just to build awareness and a sense of how the world is changing. We do surveys of clients and asking clients what can we do to be more helpful to clients, and without exception, the big feedback we get from executives is help us. You do a great job of responding to the questions and needs we have, the issues we have on the table. The greatest value is actually introducing us to questions that we haven't even thought to ask ourselves, right? And that was the genesis in many respects of the center, the Center for the Edge that I run, was Our charter is identify emerging business opportunities that should be on the CEO's agenda but are not, and do the research to persuade them to put it on the agenda. And that's a value in itself, never mind whether we can work with the client to realize those opportunities.
Hi, Caroline from CoActivate. You mentioned a couple times now the work environment redesign. I'm curious, what does that look like, and what's the best couple of examples you've seen internationally where an environment has been redesigned to support continuous learning?
I'll give you two quick ones. One actually in the US, a company called LiveOps. Very interesting company. They do call center operations for larger companies on an outsourced basis. The interesting thing about them is they have no call centers. They operate through 20,000 people who work from their home. And they've been extremely thoughtful about the kinds of the work environment. If you're having a very distributed workforce that doesn't even see each other face to face, much less interact on a sustained basis. And so they've done things. They took, for example, from actually World of Warcraft, the notion of personalized performance dashboards. So on a real-time basis, each of the 20,000 people in their organization has a dashboard that tells them in real time how they're doing on multiple levels of performance, multiple dimensions of performance. Now, in most traditional companies, first of all, we have this well-established world of business intelligence. The whole focus of business intelligence is getting information to the executives and the middle management so they can manage the workers better and harder. The notion of bringing this back to the individual worker on the front line, whoa, that's scary. And then secondly, the notion is if you're going to do that, use it as a vehicle to punish the worker. You're not performing well enough, you got 3 months. If you don't get up to speed, you're out of here. Well, LiveOps does something very different. It's created a whole set of environments, virtual environments, discussion forums, where these workers can go and start to problem solve. I'm having this real problem with this type of customer call. I'm just not getting how to respond effectively to it. Does anybody have any advice? And one of the things LiveOps does is it recognizes and rewards those who help the other people in the workforce, start coaching and helping the other workers. So it's a very different kind of environment that encourages learning. Just another example, I can't go into a lot of details because of limited time, but we've spent a lot of time, actually we think a lot of the most interesting innovations in this area are in China and India, not in the Western world. A company called Li & Fung, and I mentioned the whole notion of learning through ecosystems. Li & Fung is a Chinese company. They operate through 15,000 business partners on a global scale. One of the interesting things is we went to Li & Fung's partners and started asking them, why are you part of the Li & Fung network? And without exception, top of mind, without coaching, each partner had this answer: because we learn faster as part of the Li & Fung network than we ever could on our own or as part of anybody else's network. Huge difference. I mean, you go to a Western company and talk to their suppliers, the notion that we learn faster, forget about it. We're getting squeezed and there's lack of trust and there's all kinds of competitive dynamics. No. Very different model. And again, Li & Fung's been very thoughtful about how do you create the environment in this ecosystem that motivates and allows people to learn faster.
I think we have time for one more question.
No, sorry.
Hi, John. Nick Bolton from 10 Alphas. Expanding on the first question a bit, I'm doing my master's thesis on the art of perseverance in feature filmmaking. The average feature film takes 7 years, and I've dubbed the term the originator. There's always one person who starts the project and finishes the project, from development through to funding, production, and then distribution. And I believe they have the same characteristics as the passion of the explorer. In the corporate world, how does perseverance apply when you may have something that you want to get up, but due to budget or corporate strategic shifts or economy, sucks the perseverance out of you? Any thoughts there?
No, I think, again, there are huge institutional pressures that mitigate against this kind of passion and perseverance. And again, the power of the passionate person is that whatever those pressures, they are persevering, and they will continue despite all the challenges that are put in front of them. One thing I will say is that a big confusion I get from a lot of executives is when I talk about passionate workers, I'm not talking about happy workers. The passionate workers are often the most frustrated workers, right? They see all the opportunities, and they see all those institutional barriers that have been put in their in front of them to prevent them from addressing those opportunities. So they're not happy, at least in the conventional sense, but they are persevering. They're determined to overcome those barriers.
Thanks, John. Before I close, I just wanted to congratulate the person with the winning tweet. And I hope there's no lock on this. There is. But it is Caroline McLaren. And the tweet was, passion of explorer balances competition and collaboration, the desire for peak performance and mutual respect for peers. #passionate work. Caroline?
Nice. Excellent.
Happy Valentine's Day. And so, John, I'd like to conclude by thanking you for being the embodiment of passion, the person with that questing disposition, your commitment to the domain of making the world a better place, not just for individuals, but also for individuals in large corporations, also for large corporations who can, in fact, be a force for good in the world, and for being such a powerful connector of many people on the same quest. So thank you very much for joining us today. Please thank John.
Thank you. Thank you very much.